What if the most dominant car of the 2026 season is already under investigation after just one race? Because that is exactly what may be happening right now in Formula One. Mercedes arrived in Australia and did something no team expected this early in the new regulation era. They dominated the entire weekend. George Russell took pole position. Then on Sunday, he controlled the race and crossed the finish line in first place. Right behind him, Kimi Antonelli completed a stunning 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the very first race of the season. A perfect start, maximum points, and a car that suddenly looks faster than the entire grid. But only hours after the celebration ended, Ferrari engineers began studying the race data for Melbourne. And according to multiple reports inside the paddock, what they found may have triggered a much bigger story. Because Ferrari now believes Mercedes might be exploiting a hidden advantage in the brand new 2026 power unit regulations. An advantage that some analysts believe could be worth up to 30 horsepower during key acceleration phases. In modern Formula One, that is the difference between fighting for the podium and dominating the championship. Now, the governing body is taking a closer look, which means the team that just celebrated the perfect start to the season could suddenly be facing the first major technical investigation of the new era. So the real question is no longer who won the Australian Grand Prix. The real question is this: did Mercedes simply build the best car for 2026? Or did Ferrari just uncover something that could completely change the fight for the championship? Because once you understand the detail that triggered this investigation, the Mercedes victory in Australia may start to look very different. And if you want to follow every twist of this story, subscribe to the channel now, because this situation is only getting started. The Australian Grand Prix was supposed to be a simple beginning to the 2026 season. New regulations, new power units, and a completely new balance between electrical energy and combustion power. Every team arrived in Melbourne believing they had prepared well for this new era. Ferrari believed their engine would be competitive. Red Bull expected to fight near the front. And Mercedes arrived quietly confident in their new machine, the W17. But as soon as the cars started running on Friday, something immediately caught the attention of the paddock. The Mercedes looked comfortable, not just quick, comfortable in a way that suggested the team already understood the new regulations better than most of their rivals. George Russell set the tone during the practice sessions. Lap after lap, the Mercedes appeared stable through corners and extremely efficient on the straights. By the time the final practice session ended, Russell had already delivered a lap more than half a second faster than the closest Ferrari. Half a second may not sound dramatic to casual viewers, but inside Formula One, that number immediately raises alarm bells. Because at the beginning of a new regulation cycle, teams are usually separated by tiny margins. A tenth of a second, sometimes even less. But half a second suggests something very different. It suggests that one team may have discovered a much better solution to the new rules. Then came qualifying on Saturday, and that is when the situation became impossible to ignore. George Russell delivered a stunning lap to secure pole position for Mercedes. The car looked perfectly balanced through the high-speed sections of Albert Park. But what really impressed the engineers watching the data was the acceleration. Every time Russell exited a slow corner, the Mercedes surged forward with remarkable efficiency. And the surprises did not stop there. Right behind Russell on the grid was his teammate, Kimi Antonelli. The young Italian delivered an impressive lap of his own, securing second place and locking out the entire front row for Mercedes. Inside rival garages, engineers immediately began asking the same question. How had Mercedes unlocked so much performance so quickly? Because this was not just a fast lap from one driver. This was a clear sign that the entire car was operating at an extremely high level. But the real test always comes on Sunday. Race pace reveals the truth behind qualifying performance. And when the lights went out for the Australian Grand Prix, the race immediately delivered drama. Ironically, Mercedes did not start perfectly. Both Russell and Antonelli struggled when the lights went out. Charles Leclerc reacted faster and managed to take the lead into the first corner for Ferrari. For several laps, the fight between Ferrari and Mercedes became one of the most fascinating battles of the race. The new hybrid systems introduced in 2026 created a completely different style of racing. Drivers now had to carefully manage how and when they deployed electrical energy during overtaking attempts. Every time Russell activated the new attack mode, the Mercedes gained impressive acceleration down the straight. But that extra power also drained the battery more quickly, allowing Leclerc to fight back when the energy level dropped. For a moment, It looked like Ferrari might have the pace to challenge for victory. But then the race changed completely. A virtual safety car was triggered after another car stopped on track. Mercedes reacted instantly. Both drivers entered the pits at exactly the right moment. It was a perfectly executed double pit stop that allowed them to switch to fresh tires while losing almost no time relative to the rest of the field. Ferrari made a different decision. They stayed out on track, hoping for another neutralization later in the race. But that moment never arrived when they needed it. And once Ferrari eventually made their stop, Mercedes had already taken control of the race. From that point forward, George Russell drove with the calm confidence of a championship contender. He managed the tires carefully. He controlled the gap behind him. And lap after lap, the Mercedes looked incredibly stable at the front of the field. When the checkered flag finally appeared, Russell crossed the finish line in first place. Just behind him, Antonelli secured second. A dominant 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the very first race of the 2026 season. For the team, it looked like the perfect start to the year. But inside the Ferrari garage, the reaction after the race was very different. Because while Mercedes was celebrating victory, Ferrari engineers had already started reviewing the race telemetry. They were not looking at strategy. They were not looking at tire management. They were focused on something much more specific: the energy deployment patterns of the Mercedes power unit. And what they began to see in that data is exactly what triggered the next stage of the story. Because the numbers for Melbourne suggested something that Ferrari had quietly feared for months. The Mercedes engine might be operating with a level of efficiency that the rest of the grid simply does not have yet. And if that suspicion turns out to be correct, the dominant performance we just saw in Australia may only be the beginning of a much bigger battle behind the scenes. But the tension surrounding Mercedes did not appear out of nowhere. In fact, the concerns inside Ferrari had been building quietly for months, long before the cars even arrived in Australia. During the winter development period, several engineers across the paddock began hearing rumors about the new Mercedes power unit. Not rumors about reliability, not rumors about the chassis, rumors about something much more specific: energy deployment. Under the new 2026 regulations, the way electrical power is used has become one of the most important performance factors in Formula One. The internal combustion engine now produces less power than before, which means electrical energy is responsible for a much larger part of the car's acceleration. Every team has spent years trying to optimize this system. How quickly the battery releases energy, how efficiently it recovers energy during braking, and most importantly, how long that electrical boost can be sustained during acceleration. Get that balance wrong, and the car feels weak on the straights. Get it right, and suddenly your driver has a powerful advantage every time they exit a corner. And that is exactly the area where Mercedes now appears to be ahead of the rest of the grid. When Ferrari engineers studied the telemetry from the Australian Grand Prix, they noticed something subtle but very important. The Mercedes power unit seemed able to deliver strong bursts of electrical power without draining its battery as quickly as expected. In other words, the car was accelerating harder while still maintaining enough energy for the next straight. That kind of efficiency is extremely difficult to achieve, and it immediately raised a question inside the Ferrari garage. Had Mercedes discovered a new way to manage electrical deployment under the 2026 rules? Some analysts inside the paddock believe the answer might be yes. There have been suggestions for months that Mercedes engineers could have found a clever interpretation of the new regulations. Not necessarily something illegal, but possibly a loophole hidden within the technical language of the rulebook. A small detail, a line of regulation that allows a certain behavior in the power unit software. And if that interpretation is correct, the advantage could be significant. Some technical experts believe the Mercedes engine may effectively gain the equivalent of around 30 extra horsepower during certain acceleration phases. In Formula One, that number is enormous. 30 horsepower can mean several tenths of a second per lap. Over the distance of a race, it becomes a massive advantage, which explains why Ferrari reacted quickly after the race in Melbourne. According to several reports from inside the paddock, Ferrari engineers shared their concerns with the governing body shortly after reviewing the data. They did not file a direct protest. Instead, they requested clarification on how certain parts of the new power unit regulations should be interpreted. In Formula One, that type of request is rarely random. It usually means one thing: a rival team believes another competitor may have discovered something controversial. And when those questions reach the governing body, the next step is often a deeper technical review, which is exactly what appears to be happening now. The governing body is expected to examine how the Mercedes power unit manages energy deployment during acceleration phases, particularly how the system balances battery usage with energy recovery across a lap. Inside the Mercedes garage, the team remains calm. From their perspective, there is nothing controversial about the W17. They believe their advantage comes from careful preparation and intelligent engineering. The entire design of the car supports that argument. The side pods are aggressively sculpted. The engine packaging is extremely tight, and the floor design helps control airflow around the rear of the car, improving traction and efficiency. All of these elements work together to create a car that delivers power smoothly and consistently. And when you combine that with an advanced hybrid system, the result is exactly what we saw in Melbourne. A car that accelerates extremely well out of corners, a car that maintains strong pace over long stints, and a car capable of controlling the race from the front. But even if Mercedes is completely confident in their design, the situation in the paddock is becoming increasingly tense. Because Ferrari is not the only team paying attention to this story. Red Bull engineers are also studying the data from Australia very closely. After the race, even Max Verstappen admitted that his team simply does not have the fastest car at the moment. And when the reigning champions say something like that after the first race of a season, it sends a very clear signal. Right now, Mercedes appears to be the benchmark. But that is exactly why the investigation matters so much. Because if the governing body confirms that Mercedes has discovered a completely legal advantage, every other team will immediately begin trying to copy it. Ferrari will push its engineers harder. Red Bull will accelerate development of its own power unit systems. And the entire competitive order could shift dramatically over the next few races. But if the investigation reaches a different conclusion, if the regulators decide that Mercedes has crossed a regulatory boundary, then the consequences could be far more dramatic. Technical directives, forced changes to the power unit, possibly even penalties that could affect the championship standings. Which is why the atmosphere inside Formula One right now feels very different from what we saw on the podium in Melbourne. Because while Mercedes is celebrating the perfect start to the season, a growing number of teams are quietly asking the same question. Did Mercedes simply build the best car for the 2026 era? Or did Ferrari just uncover something that could completely change the story of this championship?